So for our 31st class, we learned the story of the Lewis and Clark expedition. And it's a cool story. I mean, it has its ups and its downs and its adventures and its cool characters. And before I tell you the story, I want to thank Dr. James and Annette McConnell, who gave me this PowerPoint and a real quick backstory. These two people, who I consider experts, gave this very talk throughout Michigan to many different historical societies, and they were nice enough to gift their PowerPoint to me. So thank you to the McConnells. And our story, I'm going to start off with kind of the eggheady stuff right out of the gates. When Thomas Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark into the West, he patterned their mission on the methods of Enlightenment science to observe, collect, document, and classify. Such strategies are already in place for the epic voyages made by explorers like Cook and Vancouver. Like their contemporaries, Lewis and Clark were more than representatives of European rationalism, but they also represented a rising American empire built on aggressive territorial expansion and commercial gain. Now, there's another point of view in the West that the native inhabitants of the land had an understanding of the landscape, the people, and the resources, and it was a really stark contrast and counterpoint to those of Jefferson's travelers, Lewis and Clark. Now, sometimes the similarities are striking, other times the differences stand as a reminder of future conflicts and misunderstandings. So there's some contextualization for you. There's an AP word right out of the gates, okay? So let's start with a really broad perspective. This is America. I hope you know that. And you see this? That's the Louisiana Purchase. For those who aren't really good at geography, that's really big, okay? So America has this brand new parcel of land, and we don't quite know what's there, so we have to figure that out, okay? And Thomas Jefferson, a man and a vision. He had a vision to go into the Louisiana Territory and document it, the people, the animals, the resources, everything. He was the visionary. He was the starting point. And here's a painting of Jefferson instructing Lewis what he's looking for, what he's hoping to do with the Louisiana Purchase. Now, there is a little bit of a myth that Lewis and Clark were the first to do that. Usually in history, the first gets a lot of fanfare, but in this case, this man did not. Alexander Mackenzie. Now, he was known for the first east to west crossing of American North of Mexico in 1793. It preceded the Lewis and Clark expedition by 12 years. So we did have somebody who ventured out before, but Lewis and Clark are much better known than Mackenzie, okay? Now, the Haitian Rebellion, or Revolution, whatever you want to call it. Now you're saying, what does this have to do? This is American history. Okay, so the French, powerful French, had an uprising from their most profitable colony, the Haitians, and they needed money. And to get money to fund this, Napoleon here was ready to drop some land to make that money. So he sold us the Louisiana Purchase for a very good price so he could fund his battles in Haiti and in Europe. Okay, so that's the starting point. So here's a painting of April 30th, 1803, and they're figuring out where to go, what to do. And if you look at this, this is pretty daunting. That's enormous. That is absolutely enormous. And you have to have a degree of bravery because you're not quite sure what's there, who's there. But there were some adventuresome individuals who were glad to check it out. Okay, and there's Lewis, and there's Clark. Okay, these are the two main people of this. Now, they departed from Camp River du Bois. Okay, now a lot of people think that they left from St. Louis. Okay, if you ever go to St. Louis, people think that they started right underneath this arch. That's not true. They actually started off from Fort Dubois. However, if you're in St. Louis, great town, check out this arch. It's 630 feet high. You can go up and take this really cool elevator to the top, and it's worth doing it. Now, little local trivia. This arch was made by the great architect Eero Saarinen, and Saarinen was the same guy who designed Cranbrook. So if you ever have been to Cranbrook to see their buildings, it's the same person who created this. Okay, little trivia for you. So on their trip, they had all sorts of adventures. So they meet up with the Indians at Council Bluff, and that was the first meeting between the tribes, the Missouri tribes and the Otto tribes near Nebraska. Now, you can see here, this was fairly friendly. And to the Americans at the time, they kind of put American Indians under one umbrella, but there's tremendous diversity. Hopefully I taught you that at the beginning of class. So this is a meeting at Council Bluffs. Charles Floyd was the only person to die on the expedition. There's Charles Floyd, and okay, there's his monument. And the journals, you can look from the journals, you can see how detailed they are. So if they caught a fish, they detailed the fish. Or they saw a brand new bird, and there's a bear, obviously, there's a boat. Copious, copious notes. So the people on this expedition were scientists as much as they were explorers. I would make that argument. Okay, they had a twofold purpose being there. And then you have the Charbonneaus join the expedition. Now, Toussaint Charbonneau is best known as the husband of Sacagawea. Now, Sacagawea was the American Indian woman who's fairly famous, who was on this expedition. And, you know, you can see they had to encamp during the winter, had to get through these tough winters, and they primarily traveled when the weather was good. You know, that makes sense. And here's actually a list of everybody who made the trip. Again, Charles Floyd was the only one who died, which wasn't bad. Okay, and there's Sacagawea, and even Seaman, the Newfoundland. So all of these people have backstories, which I'm not going to do justice for on a short video, but there's a lot of people involved in the expedition. You had the leaders, you had the sergeants, you had privates, non-military members, and even a non-human member. And you can see their trips. You know, they arrived at the Great Falls of the Missouri River, absolutely beautiful, had to figure out how to get around. The portage, you know, how to get their stuff around all of these falls. So there's a lot of pragmatism, a lot of problem solving in doing this. There's Lewis and Clark at Three Forks, and you can see, you know, it's beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous what they were exploring, but still, it was new to them. There's Sacagawea getting reunited, meeting the Shoshone Indians, which were different than the Otto and the Missouri Indians, and they started realizing American Indian groups were quite different, each one they were meeting with. And the Shoshone, they had these medallions that they would give out as signs of peace, and there's an actual medallion that they used, and it actually went pretty well. I mean, when they met with the Shoshone, they had a good time, they smoked the peace pipe together. So, you know, in a sense, they had some good interactions, they had some not so good interactions. You can see them crossing the Bitterroot Mountains, you know, snow-covered high mountains, and they had to figure all this out and keep exploring. And the Bitterroots were really, really tough. So these were tough guys and women to get through all of this. And it's very well documented. The Lewis and Clark expedition is incredibly well documented. You can take a tour and see every single spot that has a historical marker as they went. And this is just one of many in that tour. And there are people who are history buffs that take a tour, a Lewis and Clark tour. They offer it. There's separate tours for that. Okay, and you see all these markers where they, you know, finally got to the Pacific Ocean and what a big deal that was, and you know, it's marked throughout their whole thing. Now this is a little interesting. They were trying to decide what to do, and they put it to a vote, which doesn't sound all that interesting, but was kind of unique about this. They had York, who was an enslaved man, and Sacagawea, who was an American Indian woman, and they were involved with the vote. So that's kind of a precursor of what was going to be in the 20th century, where everybody could vote. But this is way ahead of those times, okay? And again, why was that vote so important? I just told you that. So just to reinforce that, there's their stop at Fort Clatsop, and you can see it's documented, every single part, you know, how they got through it, you know, how they got salt, and they, you know, had this process of boiling salt because they needed salt. I guess that you can say the Lewis and Clark expedition, A, bravery, B, pragmatism. They solve the problems, whether it's getting through the mountains or needing salt, and they work together to do that. It's kind of impressive. And then there's Traveler's Rest. We're getting toward the end of the expedition. Even if you're not into camping, I think you might not mind camping there. That would be a pretty great spot. And toward the end, they encountered the Blackfeet Indians, which was not a positive affair. In fact, they got a fight, and they realized if we don't get the heck out of Dodge, they're going to kill us. And so they got into a fight with them, and before the Blackfeet Indians could respond back, they ran away. And you can see the signature. He marked his signature to say, I was here. Okay. So eventually they get back home. There's Seaman, the Newfoundland. And the homecoming was a big deal. People were elated. They came back heroes. It was in all the papers. It went really well. For all intents and purposes, you can say the Lewis and Clark expedition was a huge success. So what happened to all of these people after this momentous journey? Now, Sacagawea, unfortunately, died at the age of 25. Now, she got a job as a translator along with her husband in a company, but she died pretty young. Now, John Coulter became kind of the quintessential mountain man. He left and he kept exploring. He got a taste of adventure and he kept seeking it out the rest of his life. And he would go to these uninhabited places. Definitely an adventuresome mountain man. Now, York's story is a really sad story. So York, who really did a great job on the expedition, when they got back, everybody on the expedition got 320 acres as a reward for their efforts, except for York. And York, and it's a fair argument, saying, hey, I don't think I should be a slave anymore. I've really done my thing. And Clark didn't see it like that. And he remained Clark's slave, and Clark got angry at him and beat him up. And York ran away and said, the heck with this. And we don't know what happened to him after 1815. The last we heard from him, he was running a carriage in Mississippi. So York's ending wasn't very good. Now, Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau, which was the son of Sacagawea and Toussaint Charbonneau, became this adventuresome guy and a gold miner, Mexican-American War. He became kind of the poster child of 19th century American history. And Seaman the dog, they say he died of grief after Lewis died, because Lewis loved this dog, made Seaman his pet, and after Lewis died, the dog just couldn't take it. That's the story. So to wrap up the story, here is Clark and here is Lewis. Now, Clark had a little bit of a happier ending. Clark became the governor of Missouri, very successful politician, died at a ripe old age. Now, Lewis, on the other hand, some people say it was a suicide, some say it was a murder, but he died in 1809. And to this day, there's debate on how it ended. And he tried to get into, well, he did get into politics, but he died soon after. So Clark had a better outcome than Lewis, okay? So I'm going to wrap this up with this idea. The fulfillment of our manifest destiny is to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions. In other words, as America, once we learned about the Louisiana Purchase, Americans kept moving west and west and west, and eventually, as you all know, it's Atlantic Ocean to Pacific Ocean and everything in between. But the Lewis and Clark expedition was this catalyst for this manifest destiny. It's our destiny to move and cover this entire nation. And that is the story in a nutshell, and I appreciate you watching.